What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 335. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas, LSV. How it goes?
Things are going great.
How are you?
I am very well. We're in the midst, you and me both, of a lot of travel, but we've got some time home here this week. Weather's great. LR is going to be great. Everything's great.
Yeah, agreed. We've got a really cool level up show for you this week about heuristics. We will explain what that is and how it may apply to you and getting better at magic in a short bit here. First, I want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. This is the destination for magic on the internet. That's right. If you want content, you're going to find free content there every single day. You're going to find draft videos, constructed videos, articles with sideboard guides and deck lists in there from some of the best players in the world. If you want cards, they got cards. Full selection of singles, sealed product. If you need sleeves, they've got them. Heck, they've even got some shirts and stuff, Limited Resources shirts, Channel Fireball shirts. It's all there at channelfireball.com. And again, free content. I mean, that's when I first started going to Channel Fireball, that's why I went. I was just like, hey, this is sweet. I get to read articles from LSV and all, my favorite pro players. And that tradition has continued through.
Two separate categories. Just so we're clear.
And while you're there, of course, you can check out their selection of singles. You can support the show directly as well via the Patreon. This comes with many perks. You can go to patreon.com/limitedresources to sign up, and it's real easy. It basically lets you decide how you want to support the show. And once you do, you will get a thank you card in the mail. I have a whole bunch of those that are going to go out. I tend to do them in very large chunks because they're really labor intensive. So if it's been a little while, thanks for your patience. You'll probably be in the next run going out here this week. And then also you get access to some really cool stuff in the Patreon feed. Like at certain levels, you can get an unedited version of this podcast with the show notes included. You also just by signing up at any level, get access to the Patreon question of the week, which we're going to get to in just a minute. And you get entered into drawings. That's right. I like to give stuff away to our patrons as a way to say thank you. And I've got 2 giveaways actually today. The first one I mentioned last week, we crossed the threshold of 1,000 patrons. That's 1,000 supporters on there, which really means the world to us. And I thought, well, let's give away some stuff. I've got a few other things I'm kicking around. Maybe next week we'll give away. But for this week, I've got an Avacyn playmat. This is a double-sided playmat from the Pro Tour. You could only get it at the Pro Tour, so I went over and got one. And I'm going to give it away here. And this one is going to go to Kyle Collington. Kyle, thanks a lot for your support. You are much appreciated, and I will be sending your playmat to you. And also, another thing we give away, this is a regular giveaway, is we give away the rares that we open for Crack-A-Pack. I got that in my hand here. You got a Jace, we've got a Declaration in Stone, a Matter Reshaper. Hey, Luis, there's a Hissing Quagmire in here.
But
you
wait,
still need it?
How can you open a Hissing Quagmire in a pack of Shadows over Innistrad?
Yeah, well, this one goes back a little bit here. So, yeah, there's anyway, so a bunch of cool stuff.
Okay, just to be clear, the Hissing Quagmire was when I asked Marshall's friend Woody at the Pro Tour if he had any Hissing Quagmires, and because we needed them and the dealers were out, and he just starts opening Shadows over Innistrad packs right in front of me. Right in front of Marshall, and I knew the card wasn't in that set. Woody did not, and I just didn't say anything.
And then eventually you told him and he just laughed. Yeah, he got a kick out of that. And then you turn him into, anyway, whatever. So,
long story short, you get a Hissing Quagmire.
You do, and a Jace and some other stuff. Also, I put these in an LR gift pack for you, which comes with a T-shirt, assuming we have your size in stock, as well as some Limited Resources sleeves, a sticker, and a pin. And the winner of this one goes to Matthew Rochford. So, Matthew, thanks so much for being a patron. And this next Crack-A-Pack is going to start seeding that next package of cards that we're going to send out. And I usually do it about every month and a half, something like that. So thank you so much to you two and everybody else who helps us out. It really does help. It's cool. I get to do a lot more breadth. I'm really trying to push into the video side of things for LR, and that's mainly due to the fact that the Patreon has been so good to us. So I put up a new video. Did you see it, Luis? The Marshall Blog Cliff?
I did, actually.
Yes, I got jealous of the chlog.
Yeah, people seem to love it. I think the candid look at you marshaling around was pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was all right. I actually feel a little weird about things like that, but people did seem to like it, so I'll probably do more of them. And you can find that in the Patreon and also on the Limited Resources YouTube channel. Okay, we've got a question of the week. This comes from George Wright. It's a straightforward one, Luis. Hi, Marshall and Luis. Do you keep track of your mistakes in limited matches? If so, what is the best way to do that in order to maximize the amount one learns from mistakes and minimize the number of times that they are repeated? I'm assuming you don't do this anymore, right? Like, you're not like taking notes about like, I shouldn't have attacked here or is that correct?
I don't do it in that sense. Like I certainly don't have a mistake counter and I'm like, oh, how many mistakes did I make this match? It's more like the mistakes I make, I do tend to keep track of. I have a pretty good memory for games of Magic and that's part of why I play Magic, I think.
Sure.
So when I screw up, I definitely keep it in mind and try to go over it later. It's also not just mistakes because learning from mistakes is great. It's a great tool. It gives you the little bit of pain too to really drive the lesson home.
Oh yeah.
But you can learn from close plays too. So like, I mean, you've seen me at tournaments, right? What I immediately do after a draft is I go up to the people who I respect and limited, who you might be standing near, and I start asking them about picks that I made during the draft or like plays that I would make during the games or hands to keep. And I think that's a super valuable tool is to just try to remember. And if you have to write it down, sure, that's the thing that works for you. But for me, I don't want to distract myself during the match, but try to remember to think the key decision points in your match. Mistake or not, sometimes sometimes it was a great play. Sometimes it was just a hard choice that wasn't clearly a mistake one way or the other.
Sure.
And then talk to other people about it, get feedback on it, see what other people think. And that's super valuable.
Yeah, I do the same. When I make a mistake that's clear where I look back and I just, what am I doing? I forgot that this card had first strike or, that was a really bad attack. I just traded 2 damage for potentially 6 or so, those ones I don't tend to mark down because I realize them right away. And there's not really a lot for me to dwell on with that. I can go up to my friend and say, hey, do you think this is a mistake? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, yeah, I knew that. Right. So like, I'm just more like scolding myself for not paying attention or for losing focus. But on the in-between ones that Luis mentioned, that's what I really like to do because a lot of time I will play a game out and then I'll have a vague sense that I've made a mistake, but I can't quite pin down what it is. Did I misassign my role? Was I too aggressive? Should I have just sat back? Where did the mistake come in? Because I felt like this game was winnable. And sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes it just wasn't winnable and I was okay. But other times, I'll ask people about, well, what would be your approach to this board state or this situation? And they'll tell me, and it's different than the one that I took. And I'll be like, I knew there was something fundamental, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one attack step or one block or whatever. It can also just be in the fundamental way that you approach the game. And that's the one that I really try to dwell on because I like focusing on that bigger plan stuff. Okay. Thanks, George, for the question. We've got a crack-a-pack here. We'll just get right through this and then we're going to get into that juicy main topic. This comes from James O. Thank you, James.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? All right. So first card, Stern Constable. Really have liked this card in red-white. That's the only place I've really found a home. I have not found a deck that wanted to play this card to get Delirium going. It just doesn't seem to be worth it. But when I can madness things out with it and get blockers out of the way, I've actually been pretty happy with Stern Constable.
I like it in black-white sometimes. It does have slight amounts of Delirium equity. I think that is accurate. Mm-hmm. But like you said, not a big part of it. But in black-white, you have Twins of Mara Estate and Murderous Compulsion as madness cards, and you have Sanitarium Skeleton. Mm. Basically, I won't put one Sanitarium Skeleton and one Stern Constable in my deck as the only combo, but in a black-white deck that already wants Sanitarium Skeleton and has a couple madness cards, you can play a Stern Constable.
But what about red-white?
Well, I think that red-white is fine. I
like it in red-white.
It fits there because there you're actually willing to trade a card for 2 or 3 damage. And sometimes you just, have Fiery Temper or Senseless Rage. Senseless Rage is a very good card. So yeah, it's fine in these decks. This is a lot of words to say that we're not going to, by any chance, pick this out of the pack, though.
No, but it is an interesting one. Nagging Thoughts is next. 1 in a blue sorcery. Look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put 1 in your hand, 1 in your graveyard, and you can madness it for the same cost. Haven't been super impressed by Nagging Thoughts. I have run it a couple of times, but I usually find that there's better options than it.
Basically, this is the card that works in like the red-blue spells matter deck and can occasionally go into blue-green if you have like a Delirium theme. But in general, the only time I play this is if I have Pyrohound in my deck, I probably want Nagging Thoughts. Otherwise, I probably don't.
Shard of Broken Glass, that's the equipment. 1 to cast, 1 to equip. Creature gets +1/+0, and when it attacks, you may put the top 2 cards of your library in your graveyard.
So it's funny. If you play this card, remember to use it. I can't say, like, I think I've had 3 opponents so far. And granted, these are opponents in a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour who have not actually milled themselves.
Oh, my goodness.
When clearly they should have. It was like turn 4. If the card's in your deck, then you should be milling. And I don't know, maybe it's just a hard trigger to remember because it's attacks before blocks. In any case, the card's just fine. It's a kind of like low-tier Delirium Enabler or low-tier equipment if you have, like, Abyssinian Missionaries. But
exactly.
But again, not an exciting card.
No, I try not to run it. Sanitarium Skeleton is next. It's black 1/2, and you can pay 2 and a black to return it from your graveyard to your hand.
Better than it first looked, but not the kind of card I want to take early. This is the kind of card among all the cards we've seen so far that deep into pack 3, this sometimes you're like, I will take Sanitarium Skeleton over Murderous Compulsion. You know, like if you have 2 Call to Bloodlines and you're just like super, super in need of Sanitarium Skeleton, but in general, not a card I would ever take early.
Yeah, same. Moorland Drifter, it's been fine. 1 and a white for a 2/2, and it has Delirium. It gets flying. Card's fine. You can play it.
It's fine.
It never gets flying. It never has, at least in the sanctioned event.
No, not in the history of Magic.
No.
And as we'll talk about later, 2/2s for 2 are not at their best in this format, so that makes Moorland Drifter. It looks like a 2/2 for 2 with upside is generally a good pick, but in this set, I'm not super juiced.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's underperformed a little. Structural Distortion, 3 and a red sorcery, exile target artifact or land. It does 2 damage to that permanent's controller. No. Have not played one of those yet. Aim High.
Aim High is better than I thought it was.
Yeah, nice little combat trick, right?
Yeah, and there's also multiple like tap effects, like Press the Advantage or Sleep Paralysis, and Aim High just really just wrecks your opponent if they cast one of those. You get to untap your creature block, and it's just brutal. So in 2 mana for +2/+2 and reach is also fine. So yeah. I think Aim High is fine. I do in fact aim higher for a first pick though.
Agreed, and there has really been nothing here. God, next card's bad too. Shambleback. That's the black sorcery, exile a creature card from a graveyard. You get a 2/2 zombie, and you gain 2 life.
I found this card to be wildly unplayable.
Me too. Terrible. Next card I don't like either. My God. We are into the uncommons now. Open the Armory. That's the 1 and a white sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment. Reveal it. Put it in your hand, then shuffle.
I play this card in exactly 1 deck, and
what is it?
That's black-white that has at least 1 copy of Deadweight and equipment.
And equipment, and Bound by Moonsilver in that mix too somewhere?
I actually don't love the Bound by Moonsilver all that much.
You want the cheapest.
Because with Deadweight, this is 1 black-white, give a creature -2/2. That's a card you would play in a black-white deck.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you can also, I mean, you need more than just that, but if you also have equipment you care about, like a, True Faith Sensor or something like that, then I've had good experiences. That being said, you can get this card with 2 cards left in the back, so totally. Not a big deal.
Not a priority. All right, I like this card. Wildfield Scarecrow. That's the 3 colorless for a 1/4 with Defender, and you can pay 2 mana and sack it to search your library for up to 2 basics and put them in your hand.
That card is quite good.
I'm a fan.
It's an enabler for both 3-color decks and Delirium, which are often one and the same. It also it's a 2-for-1, right? It gets you 2 lands. Might block a creature beforehand too. So
totally.
I think the card does a lot of good things. So
yeah, it just has a lot going on. Mana fixing, Delirium blocking.
This is my pick right now. Not that I'm really excited about it, but this is what I would take currently.
I'm kind of excited about it. Morcrit Necropod is our last uncommon. It is 6 mana, 5 and a black for a 7/7 slug horror with menace. And when it attacks or blocks, you sacrifice another creature or land.
I have liked Morcrit Necropod. It's a very good finisher. Menace, it doesn't get the damage through like trample or just unblockable, but Menace really punishes your opponent when they want to chump block.
Oh, totally. And they totally want to chump block this thing.
Right. So I like Morcrit Necropod. I would still open on Wildfield Scarecrow because it's colorless, but Necropod's probably the next best card.
Yeah, I still like the Scarecrow too. All right, our double face card is Gatstaff Arsonist. So that's the 4 and a red 5/4. It's a werewolf that turns into a 6/5 menace.
Nothing special going on here.
Yeah. I still like the Scarecrow somehow.
Oh yeah.
All right, our rare.
What's our rare? Is it good?
It's okay. It's Scourge Wolf.
Oh, so that's so red. Yeah.
Yeah.
2/2, and if you have first strike, and Delirium gains double strike.
Yeah, and it's a wolf horror, by the way.
Yeah, which I found out when I flipped Thing in the Ice with this.
Indeed. I actually don't really like this card very much, though. The red is a steep price to pay.
I'm just not starting with a red card.
Yeah,
I could start with a colorless card. And because
sorry, we have another rare.
Oh, well, we'll get to that in a second. But,
but
red is significantly different than 1 in a red. If it was 1 in a red, I would just take this card easily.
Totally.
But red mean, and being a 2-drop, like red 3 for a 5-drop, that's just about the same as 4 in a red. It's not substantially different.
Mm-hmm.
Red for a 2-drop that you want to cast on turn 2, being able to utilize this means you need like 10 mountains in your deck, and that's just a big commitment to start the draft with.
We upgraded.
Oh, did we? What did we upgrade to?
Archangel Avacyn.
Oh, come on. Come on.
I'm not kidding.
Is it a foil one too?
No, it's regular. Well, this is going in the next giveaway, so we got that one started off right.
Card in the set, so
literal best card in the set. It's really funny because we were going to take Wildfield Scarecrow until this point, and then we slightly upgraded to the Archangel.
This is the closest I'm ever going to get to opening an Archangel Avacyn. Just so
this is the first one I've ever opened too, and it's going to fly away on me in some amount of time. Oh, that's funny. I put up the. I always, if you go to to lrcast.com and go to the blog, I put up every Crack-A-Pack as a straw poll so that, if you want, you can vote on what you thought was right or if you disagreed with us, but I'm not going to put this one up. This one's just too stupid. All right. Well, that's that. We take Archangel Avacyn. No questions asked. Okay. So that that puts us into our main topic for the weekend. This is an awesome one. Luis, you've been kicking this one around for a little while, and you put pen to paper and came up with a really sweet one. This is a level up topic on heuristics. Why don't you start us off on our journey through heuristics here? All
right. First of all, you're going to hear the word heuristic or heuristics a lot, so I'm going to define it because it's less of a fancy word than you might think, and I will guarantee you that every single person listening to this uses tons of heuristics in their daily life, while they're playing Magic, while they're doing anything, because it's a very useful tool. So heuristics, the definition is they can be mental shortcuts that ease the cognitive load of making a decision. Examples of this method include using a rule of thumb, an educated guess, an intuitive judgment, stereotyping, profiling, or common sense. So basically what heuristics are is they're the like 80-20 rule. They're 80% of the time that this rule works.
Yeah.
And that's not an exact number, but that's just like a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Which is a heuristic.
Yeah, right.
Basically, you have decided, like, every time I go to a restaurant that has a cheeseburger on the menu, I'm picky about food, I'll order the cheeseburger. That's a heuristic you found to solve the difficulty of finding food, especially if you're someone who's picky.
Right.
Another one would be when I'm choosing between two movies to watch, I'm gonna choose the one that looks more like an action movie or is an action movie because I've found that I've watched a lot of movies and I like action movies more. Yeah. And that does not mean, and this is the key part, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you like, and it doesn't mean that sometimes it's better for you to watch a very good drama over a very mediocre action movie. You'd rather watch the drama there, but your heuristic just says lean towards this.
Right. One that comes up for a lot of people every day is like how to get to work or school or wherever they're going. Well, I take the freeway because generally it's faster, but it's not always faster. I could sit down and get on Google Maps and map out a thing that might save me 5 minutes here and there, but I just don't want to waste my time making that decision. And so I'm just going to go with the 80%er and say, oh, the freeway is probably faster today. And you find these things in every aspect of your life. In fact, when I was reading your notes for this, Luis, I just thought, I think I don't think I ever think about anything. I
can attest to that.
Yeah, I just go from like lily pad of heuristic to lily pad of heuristic and just try to stay afloat,
Well, that's because heuristics are, again, incredibly powerful because imagine the number of decisions you have to make in your day-to-day life, not to mention a game of Magic.
Yeah.
Being able to offload that to heuristics, put a bulk of that there, frees you up for trying to figure out the novel situations, the situations that are not encapsulated here. So it kind of the inspiration for this actually came because of the sign-off that I did a couple weeks ago, the top 7 killer apps. and looking through that list, I'm like, man, a lot of these are heuristics. I should actually talk about that. Mm-hmm. So the reasons to use heuristics, and part of the reason that we lean on them so hard here in LR, and we're just maybe more organized about it than you might think, even though, again, everyone listening uses tons of heuristics, even if you'd never even heard the word before. One is that they're easy to learn and they're sticky. So this is, jokes aside, even though I do like making jokes, this is why names like quadrant theory or vanilla test are important. It's important, or even cabs, as joke of a name that is, it's important to put a memorable name to a topic and have that name in and of itself describe a lot of the topic. So when you look at vanilla test, if you know what that means, and then, listeners do after they listen to it, vanilla test also gives you a handhold of like, oh, what, you're not going to say vanilla test. What is that again? Like the name already describes it.
Right. And you just know immediately when you hear that term what that means.
Right. And we're going to talk about that one specifically later, but it's a handhold. It's easy to pick up and it's sticky. And that's really important because you want, you want the things that you're trying to learn to stay with you.
I thought you were describing a banana.
Right. Yes. Heuristics are generally correct. If they're not, they wouldn't be a heuristic, and this is that more often than not. They're not an exact percentage. It's not like if you're right 46% of the time, you can't be a heuristic. Some could be, but heuristics tend to be correct more often than not. And that's why they're useful. If a heuristic was right 10% of the time, it wouldn't be a heuristic. It wouldn't actually be a useful thing. That would be more of an analytical tool that sometimes comes up, but not the same thing.
Right.
So they offer a guideline. And here's the big part: is they reduce decision fatigue. They, like you said, it frees up your mind to think about bananas instead of how you're going to get to work every day.
Oh yeah.
Magic. Like, try to count the number of decisions you have to make in a game of Magic, or even in a turn of Magic. Especially when, you have to decide which land to play. You have to decide why you're playing the land, or, what cards you could be drawing, decide what cards to play, how to attack or block. When you're talking live Magic, you also have to decide, how you're going to sequence them, or how long you're going to wait to try to, what signals are you giving your opponent. There's, if you attack and they block, what are you going to do? There's just, dozens to even more than that sometimes of decisions per turn.
Per turn cycle, yeah. I mean, those things add up in a big way.
Decision fatigue is a real thing, and that to use another concept is when you have too many decisions, it doesn't matter how easy they are. The aggregate makes it more difficult for you to make good decisions.
Yeah. Another thing that pops up with when to use them, you said that they reduce decision fatigue, which is, I think, their primary role. I also feel like they're a reasonable default, right?
Yes.
A lot of times you'll come to a situation where you don't have the information needed, or you don't know how to get the information needed to make a fully fleshed out decision. And if that's the case, well, what do you default to?
Right.
Where do you turn? What do you do? Because if you're playing a game of Magic or anything in life, you do have to make a decision on what you're going to do. And you need to have sort of a baseline of, well, this is what I do in this situation. Right. And you can use these heuristics as a fallback plan for that. And I think that that's really where they, solidify their big chunk of your processing power, is by saying, if I come to a situation and I don't know what to do, this is my default plan. And that just makes up a big piece of, your decision-making power right there.
Exactly. And that's, another reason that we use them so often is that they offer you a way to kind of make up for the fact that you don't have all the information, or whether it's because you haven't learned it yet. One of the reasons we use heuristics as teaching tools is if you don't know why you're supposed to make all these decisions or how, heuristics offer a really good signpost. You're
Totally.
It's oh, I should do this. I might not know exactly why, but I'll learn that, and you'll learn it through playing, but they give you a guideline. It also is, I don't have the information. It's I don't know if I should play this 4-mana card or this 5-mana card. I don't know. It's hard for me to predict what my opponent is going to play next or which one I'm going to need in play. Well, one of the heuristics we're going to talk about today is using all your mana, and so I'm going to play the 5-mana card instead of the 4-mana card. It's a great tiebreaker. So there's a lot of reasons heuristics are awesome. And we're going to talk today about kind of how they go wrong, which also gives everyone a good refresher on the valuable ones that we talk about here. So it's a nice little 2-for-1. It's getting a refresher on a lot of the heuristics that we've found the most useful, both in the podcast and just in playing Magic, and talking about when you should break from them and when they don't always follow through. Because going from knowing nothing to knowing a heuristic to knowing when the heuristic is wrong is just kind of like a learning curve.
Yeah, and I think that is what you just described there, and what we're going to be talking about quite a bit. It's going to pop up, I think, is that curve, because a lot of what we're going to talk about when it comes to the stuff that we use on the podcast are heuristics that we give. We call them tools or whatever, but they all fall under that same category. Are ways that we can get you, as a broad listener base. We have a lot of listeners on the show. And
wait, why are we getting the listeners? Ways we can get you?
The ways that we can get you from being in a position of relatively low experience to one where you've really made up a lot of ground. You were saying that, describing a heuristic as like an 80-20. Well, before you have the heuristic, where are you at? You're just randomly doing things. And I think we all can look back to the time when we first started playing Magic, when that's exactly what we were doing. I had no idea when I was supposed to attack, block, how I was supposed to play my lands, tap my mana, any of that stuff. And, once I started to get some of these basic guidelines in place, I improved a lot. I went from, 5% to 80% or whatever. But part of our responsibility on the show also is to get you from the 80% to the 100, or at least as close as you can get. And this show is going to focus a lot on that aspect as well.
Yeah. And to be very clear, every single player who plays Magic, from the best of the best, and on down, use heuristics. Yes. I use heuristics every single game I play. So I'm not saying you need to advance past these to get to the next level. It's more like you just need to know how to use this tool the best possible way. So where heuristics go wrong, it's the fact that they're generally correct, not always correct. And where do they go wrong is when you have a situation that is close enough to a situation which demands a certain heuristic, but different in important ways that make it incorrect to use that heuristic. And Magic is definitely a game that is tons of novel situations, especially limited. This is part of the reason I love limited more than constructed. Is limited, every single game is very close to unique, whereas constructed, it's more like trying to figure out the matchup or how the cards work and how the decks work. But game to game, it's a lot of similarities. Limited, there's just not that many similarities game to game in terms of the specific decisions, even if there's overarching themes. Mm-hmm. So in a world of novel situations, heuristics obviously lose value.
For sure.
And then the other is that you want to offload your decision-making power to heuristics, but you also need to know when to break from them. So you need to have mastery of them, but be reevaluating them as you're playing through, while also still getting the value from leaning on them, which is tricky. And we're going to try to navigate through this today, give you some tools to do that. Well, let's dive into it, I guess.
Let's just get into these examples. And like you said, we're going to use examples from the podcast. And, we'll kind of put a bow on all of them at the end of it. But we're going to go through a few of the ones that we often use, the heuristics that we promote on the podcast to help people improve, as a group. And we're going to start talking about some of the exceptions and the ways to actually analyze these from this perspective. So let's start with the vanilla test, because that's, I think that the vanilla test is one of our oldest and probably most useful, card evaluation heuristics. Right. So the vanilla test, and the first couple of things we're going to talk about are card evaluation, and before we get into the in-game stuff. And the vanilla test is just definitely the place to start. It's the place with the least text. Yep. They're vanillas. And this is which sets of stats and cost are acceptable versus not acceptable versus good. Yep. And so let's go down and take a look and see what the vanilla test states, and then also when you should break from that. So 1/1s for one, these are almost always bad. I think this one's very safe to use because I have not found a format where just a 1/1 for one with no text is a playable card. Right. Sometimes you can sideboard them in. We're not really talking about that, but this is almost past heuristic to rule at this point. And where that's dangerous, of course, is there's going to be a set where like 1/1 for one are somehow just great. And this is going to lead us astray. But that hasn't happened so far. But that is the point anyway, right?
Yes. So the next one's the big one for this set. And that's that, the vanilla test states that 2/2s for 2 and 2/1s for 2 are good. Mm-hmm. Like these are desirable cards. And it almost always works. It's actually a very solid rule or heuristic. Mm-hmm. In Shadows of Innistrad, I'm actually finding it doesn't hold up. Cards like Ghoul Caller's Accomplice and Furtive Homunculus are not cards that have impressed me. I tend not to pick them early in draft. I don't play the 2/1s generally, and Ghoul Caller's Accomplice I'll play, but I haven't been impressed by it. A 2/2 for 2 with reasonable upside, it draws you another 2/2 out of your graveyard, essentially. I mean, that sounds like a great card.
That's a rock-solid card.
I could never imagine cutting it from Magic Origins or picking it like 5th. I would take it like 2nd or 3rd a lot of the time. Yeah. But in this set, this is a card that wheels, or should wheel, in my opinion, and is a card that I don't prioritize and again, sometimes cut off and play. So the heuristic that 2/2s for 2 are good is not one I believe that holds out. And the way to predict that, well, it's hard to predict, first of all. Second is the way to kind of evaluate that is playing the games. It's really hard to know the answer to something like that by just looking at all the cards. And this is why in the set review we're like, oh, Ghoul Color's Accomplice. This card's like a C+. I think that's probably what we gave it, but I don't even know.
That's what I would give it now, or that's what I would give it going back in time.
Yeah, I would probably give it a C- now.
Yeah, I agree.
And Homunculus just like a D.
D. Yeah.
So figuring out how the format lines up and what happens in the games that's you getting more information. I think at the beginning of the set you're supposed to say these cards are good because that's generally been a safe assumption. I think once you've played a bunch of games and seen how cards interact, you're supposed to move away from that. And this is one example of a heuristic which I don't believe works for this, of the vanilla test that doesn't work for this one. The next is the one that is going to be going to fluctuate the most among every set, and that's the 2/3s and 3/2s for 3, which tend to be, average to below average, according to the vanilla test. You're never like excited about these, but these values go up and down because it just depends on the format. It also important is which one is better, whether you want 3 mana 2/3s or 3 mana 3/2s, because
there's a big difference there.
Different sets want different things. And again, it's hard to predict where these are at. And in general, I would say you can start by assuming that the 2/3s are better, but set to set, that's not always the case. And you get a little bit of an edge by figuring that out.
For sure.
3/3s for 4 and 4/4s for 5, I'd actually like to downgrade. These haven't been good for a long time. I think maybe, I don't know the exact words you used when you first enacted the vanilla test many decades ago, but I assume 3/3s for 4 were acceptable.
Yeah, and it was Ryan, by the way, who was the real first, proprietor of the vanilla test, and yes, they were acceptable at that time.
Right, and I think now that heuristic is out of date. I think 3/3s for 4 are unacceptable.
I agree.
You should generally be looking not to play them.
They are below the curve for sure.
Yeah, and that's just how Magic has evolved.
Yeah.
Again, this is a heuristic. Some sets 3/3s for 4 are going to be playable.
Yep.
And then I think another very safe one is an XX for X, starting at 3 or more is just great. 3/3 for 3, 4/4 for 4. I have not met a set where that's just not great. So
what's the takeaway here?
The takeaway is that vanilla is still a very good baseline for evaluating creatures. It's a solid heuristic. I still recommend it. We still both think it's a very good learning tool and a good way to approach new cards. But you should constantly be looking to reevaluate it. You should not lean on it once the set is out. Once the set is out, look at the 2 and 3 cost creatures, the 2/2s for 2, 2/1s for 2, and then the 2/3s and 3/2s for 3. Look at them with a critical eye because that's where this is most likely to break. And in this set, I think the 2-drops break. I think that they have broken to where they've fallen under their normal value, and that's something that will take a lot of people by surprise if they don't really reevaluate this.
Yeah, it's funny because going back to the beginnings of the vanilla test, it was actually first, the thing that Ryan really wanted to hammer home with it was that we saw a common card evaluation mistake happen, which was that people would downgrade cards that had mediocre abilities on them and ignore what the creature was at its base stats, where, they would have a card that was like a 3/2 for 3, so acceptable, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But then it would have like pay 6 mana, it gets flying until end of turn or something. And people would be like, oh, this card sucks. Because they realized, well, 6 mana is too much for that ability, so I don't like this card. But what we were trying to point out was, no, you could erase that and play this card and not have it be a disaster. And that's why that got brought up. Well, now we use it in a different way. I mean, whatever, that card is fine. I'm not, I made that up. But the point is that people would say, I don't want to play this card because the ability's not good. And it was like, well, that's not how you should approach this evaluation, right? And, because not even because the ability is not good, because the ability is not, costed in a way that I'm happy with. Now I view the vanilla test, I think it's evolved with the show, as more like setting the table for a card evaluation. When I look at a card, a brand new creature that I've never seen before, I want to put it on the vanilla test first just to see, am I happy or sad right now, right? Is it a 3/1 for 6 mana? Well, this thing better damn well win me the game when I play it, right? And I have a really high expectation on what it does in the text box. And if it's a 3/3 for 1 mana, then I'm like, wow, what do I have to sacrifice 2 lands here? Like what's going on with this card? Right. And so it helps me approach that text box in a meaningful way. And, but the thing that I think the real takeaway here that you hit on, Luis, is the fact that that's just your initial, like you're only looking at that at the beginning. And then as the set progresses, you will be adjusting these, and you can't just rely on the vanilla test and just stamp it in stone. It's just a starting point.
Exactly. And that's more what I wanted to talk about. I think it's worth bringing up the fact that the 2-drops aren't good in this set, because that's one that's non-obvious, and again, it is one that almost never ends up that way.
Right, that's rare that happens.
But even past that, it's like, how do you use this tool, and when should you be looking to analyze, its shortcomings? And and I think the shortcoming is that Magic is such a game of new situations, new environments, that a rule that you guys made 5 years ago is unlikely to hold up for every single set. Though it holds up very well. If you notice, we're not saying scrap this rule. We're saying here's the places where
we adjust it. I mean, there's nothing hard and fast. Like we've never.
I think I just did.
I think you did too.
I just said 3 3s for 4. No longer good.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that, like, maybe 4 years ago on the podcast we would have been like, oh, this card's fine, it passes the vanilla test, and now we're like, I really want a little more out of it. So
it doesn't pass the French vanilla test.
That's different. That is different.
All right. So the next one is analogs. So this is an analog is a card that is very similar to a previous card. And, sometimes you'll have like 3 mana 2/2 flyer, and then 3 mana 2/1 flyer. Like, clearly those are similar. Sometimes you'll have spells with similar effects, like 2 mana give a creature +2/+2 versus 2 mana give a creature or 2 mana give a creature +2/+2 in lifelink versus 2 mana give a creature +2/+2 in first strike. Like, these cards are the cards that are similar. The heuristic that we're going to use is how good was the first card? What did it do? What's the difference between the first card and the second card? How good is the second card? We're going to use this first card to evaluate the second card.
Yeah, and I mean, and we have a long-standing tradition for a lot of these cards, right?
Right.
Like, what's the lightning bolt of the set is something that you'll hear people ask a lot.
Yeah, exactly. What's the giant growth of the set?
Right. You're not comparing it literally to lightning bolt and giant growth. You're comparing it to every iteration that we've seen of these cards. And where does this one sit on the scale? Is this kind of like a version of it, or is it kind of like a wow, they really pushed this one. This one's sweet, And there's a wide range there but it helps give you context to compare it to what we know. Also, it's just a great heuristic for somebody who looks at sets a lot, like most of our listeners, and like you and I certainly do, which is that Wizards of the Coast knows what they're doing, and they don't try to reinvent the wheel every set. They give us things to latch on to, like, what's the giant growth of the set? What's the blah, blah, blah of the set? And that helps us frame each of those cards.
What's the 5-power menace black creature of the set that's going to go last pick?
The 5/3 or whatever, yeah. And these are, I mean, I think that's an incredibly useful shortcut because, and I think it's something that a lot of people pick up on over time, but maybe don't know about right away, because they look at it like, oh my God, 350 new cards. Like, it's overwhelming. How am I ever going to know what any of these cards do? But then after you've done this for a few sets, you're like, oh, there's certain strains of cards, and there's a pretty big list of them that just have similarities to cards in almost every set. And when you start to chain those together, then you can start put those into context much quicker.
Definitely. And again, it's the reason we use this heuristic is that it helps us save a lot of time and energy. Again, why reinvent the wheel? Why start from first principles to decide whether 2 mana deal 3 damage is good? You can just look at previous versions of the card, and this holds true for more complicated cards too. And the danger here, and the reason that I wanted to bring this topic up, was that this can also lead you very far astray. When the differences are very impactful, especially when they don't look impactful. So the example I've got today is a really good one. It's Spiteful Motives. So this is 3 in a red. Enchant creature, give a creature +3/+0 in first strike, and it has flash. And there's also Lightning Talons. This is from a couple M sets previously. 2 in a red, enchant creature gets +3/+0 in first strike. Mm-hmm. So these cards are very similar. In fact, they're 1 colorless mana and 1 keyword off. But the difference is that Spiteful Motives is just a very good card, and Lightning Talons was almost straight up unplayable. I mean,
basically unplayable.
You can play it, but let's just we can say it's unplayable, and then we'll be, our heuristic of when it gets played is often enough, infrequently enough that'll work. So what took these cards from, if you looked at Spiteful Motives, I think a lot of people did this. I can guarantee you, they looked at Spiteful Motives, whether they knew it or not. They thought, this looks like Lightning Talons or similar other cards in this vein. This card is crap, but Spiteful Motives is quite good. And trying to figure out when something like that happens is super important. As it turns out, the addition of Flash completely changes the context of the card. No longer is it an aura, it's actually just a combat trick. It says aura on it, and that's also part of the thing that tricks people. Mm-hmm. But Spiteful Motives isn't an aura, it's a combat trick.
It's just a combat trick.
It's just one that happens to stick around afterwards, and that's why it's so good.
And it often garners you a 1-for-1 the turn you play it too.
Right. When you use Spiteful Motives and kill their 4/4 with your 2/2 and you have a 5/2 first strike in play, you're up a significant amount of advantage. So I think that Spiteful Motives overperforms in a lot of people's minds because it looks so much like a historically bad card.
Right. Like you could easily just ignore that. Right. Yeah. You could say, it's a Lightning Talons variant, whatever. I don't like those cards.
And Senseless Rage is another good example because that's, 1 in a red, +2/+2, Madness 1 in a red. Again, this is more of a combat trick than an aura. You have to do a little bit more work maybe, but Senseless Rage is a beating. If you Senseless Rage during combat and you win the combat, you end up with a giant monster.
Yeah, totally. And you're down a card, yeah.
It is not 2 mana, give a creature a +2/+2 aura. That card is very bad. So one of the danger areas here, and this is where you can apply this better, is when a card looks like a previous bad card, pay very close attention to the differences. When a card looks like a good card, the same thing can also happen, but it's less likely to. You're way more often going to get a mismatch when a card looks bad, looks like a bad card, but isn't in fact bad. Mm-hmm. And look for things that really change the paradigm of where the card exists too. Flash is a big one. Cantripping is a big one, like Jace's Scrutiny, a card which I know is...
I was just going to bring that card up.
Yeah, I know it's controversial, but even setting aside the fact that I like the card a lot, I think most people would say that the card is at least playable.
Totally.
And
which all the other versions of that card have not met that criteria.
There have been like 5 different -X, -O, or -4, -O blue cards that are just horrible.
Right, and they never see play.
And that's part of what's probably holding back Jace's Scrutiny, free Jace's Scrutiny. It's the fact that
politics on the show, please.
This cantrips at such a cheap cost makes this a very different card. So good cards can camouflage themselves by looking like bad cards.
And by the way, if you listen, I went back and listened today what we said about Jace's Scrutiny on the set review. We hit on this. We hit on this and said traditionally these cards suck, but we keep coming up with cards that traditionally are mediocre or suck, but this one gives you the card back eventually. Does that push it over the line into playability? Right. And at the time, like I gave it a D, right? I said, I'm going to stick with the heuristic and say it's sometimes playable. I would upgrade it now to a C, maybe even a C plus. Like I think the cards, like you can put it in your deck and there's no shame. But that was us setting the table as far as saying, well, now I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this question, right? Normally that kind of card would get an F. Those cards are just basically unplayable, or at least they just never end up seeing the light of day in anybody's 23 cards. So I upgraded it to a D as a hedge, right? But the interesting part about that is that we were dealing directly with the heuristic during that part. And, I went back to the clickable set review on Channel Fireball, and I just listened to what we had to say. And it's like, it's a perfect example of you and I using what we know from the past and applying it to a possible change and making a prediction based on that. And, for me, I think that like that's an absolutely great example of how we use these analogs.
Exactly. And this is, again, we were using this heuristic without even formally knowing what exactly, without spelling out exactly what we were doing. And
totally.
And that's why this is a good example of it. So the takeaway here is that cards that look like bad cards are more likely to be underrated. And try to see when a change to a card changes the context dramatically. Like
fundamentally changes how a card plays.
Adding a mana, taking a mana away is unlikely to like drastically change how a card plays. Giving +2/+0 instead of +2/+2, like on a first strike combat trick, for example, that's there's 1 in a white +2/+0 in first strike and 1 in a white +2/+2 in first strike. Those cards are going to play so similarly because of first strike.
Totally.
That I think that you can use whichever one you saw first and evaluate the second one pretty well. It turns out Spiteful Motives, Jace's Scrutiny, these are the kind of cards that very, very hard to evaluate if you're using this shorthand.
Yep. And I think that the key is what you said about focusing on what really does change it, right? What fundamentally changes the way that this card plays? And if you can identify that, you might be ahead of the curve a little bit. For the majority of cards, you're probably just going to use the heuristic, and it's going to be close enough to correct that that's going to, let you focus on the weird build around me's and the new type of cards that you get.
Exactly. So the next is the last one about card evaluation, and this is quadrant theory.
Oh yeah.
And this is one of the heuristics I hear most from LR listeners, and one of the ones that we talk about the most when we're evaluating cards. This is saying that you should evaluate cards on the following metrics, in the following stages of the game: developing, parity, ahead, and behind. So what this is trying to say is you should look at a card in these 4 situations to determine the value of the card. And why don't you explain a little bit about what brought you to introducing this?
So this was something that Brian Wong brought to the table while we were, during his stint and one of his earliest episodes, because he recognized that this fit into the LR philosophy very cleanly. Quadrant theory ends up encapsulating a lot of best case scenario mentality, which is another heuristic, or maybe it's more of a tool, but, something that we talked about on the show early on a lot about a mistake that people would make while evaluating cards, in that they would assume that it would always be played and utilized under the best case scenario. And you'll hear me often hammer on a card for being terrible when you're behind. Stensia Masquerade comes to mind, of a card that, if you're behind on board, it does stone nothing. And in my experience playing limited, sometimes I'm ahead, sometimes I'm behind, sometimes I'm at parity, and I'm always basically always developing my board during the first few stages of the game. And when it comes to the quadrant theory, this is a good way to hold yourself accountable, right? This is a good way for you to say, okay, Stensia Masquerade, let's put it on this quadrants here. And in each one of them, you can do it however, you can give them a number, a 1 out of 10, and then average it, or however you want. But, is it good when you're developing your board? No, it's not particularly good. It doesn't attack or block. It doesn't necessarily help you attack or block. It might, but that's usually a little bit later. Is it good when you're at parity? I don't know. It depends. Is it good when you're ahead? Absolutely. Is it good when you're behind? Absolutely not. And so, looking at a card like Stensia Masquerade, you can easily put it on here and walk away saying, well, this card isn't very good, right? It didn't really hit that hard in developing. Maybe it's a question mark on parity. It's great when you're ahead, but that's the one that we care about the least. And it's terrible when you're behind, which is one of the ones we care about the most. So putting it on that, you could easily dismiss it. But the truth is that card does have a home. It does. It needs a very specific deck with the good support, but you can absolutely make that card work. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about quadrant theory, is that it's meant to force you to view the card in the different situations that you find yourself in Magic games, game in and game out. But it isn't necessarily meant to be, the stamp of all, just because it isn't great in all the quadrants or whatever.
Right. And I think that the key here is, this is a very good tool for evaluating cards. I think this is excellent. We continue to use it. One of the things when I came on the show is, I'm not looking to change a bunch of stuff, of course. Limited Resources is an awesome show, and we're not trying to steer it into a new direction, but things are going to change. And if I thought quadrant theory was outdated or terrible, I would definitely have pushed for getting rid of it.
Oh, totally.
I did not think those things. I think quadrant theory is a really, really good way of looking at cards, and for all the reasons that you described. Where I think it breaks down, because you explicitly tell people under which circumstances should you look at a card, not just, man, this Flameblade Angel is a great card, or this 6 mana 5/5 is a great card. Mm-hmm. Like it's telling you all the reasons why you shouldn't just, the story doesn't end there. Where this breaks down is when people do closer to what you said, which is average it, give it a score in each theory or each quadrant, and average it out there. I think that's actually a very dangerous thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I've used this example before on the show. I'm going to use it again. A 1 mana 5/5 that can't block is bad in a lot of these quadrants, but it's an unprintably good Magic card. We would give it an A+. We would say you should never pass it. Totally. So clearly the quadrant theory isn't, or rather quadrant theory isn't saying you add the score of each quadrant and that's how you can't get an A unless you score well in at least 3 of the 4 or whatever.
Right.
What it's trying to give you tools to evaluate the card. It does not give you, it's not the end of the story. It's not just like, you have to look at this, and if it fails in some of them, it fails. So I think the way to properly utilize this is look at all cards through this lens. I think that's very good. But really look for excellence more than places where it's weak. Places where it's weak are important too. You have to know those things. But any card that's like an A+ in one of the quadrants is likely to be a solid
very
card.
Good card. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you said, ahead is the one where you care about the least, and behind is the one you care the most. But if there's a card that's an A+ one behind, it's just an A+. Like, it's hard to imagine that being the case otherwise.
Yep, I agree, 100%. Yeah.
Like, if there's a card that's like, destroy all your opponent's creatures if you have no creatures in play. Like, clearly that's just a busted Magic card.
Right.
Even though it's not good when you're at parity or ahead. So I think that Quadrant Theory is a heuristic that's very valuable. Continue to use it, but don't look at it as a rule or don't look at it as boxes you have to check. It's not 4 boxes and you have to make a check mark in each. It's here's a lens at which to evaluate a card, not the whole picture of the card.
Yeah, the way I like to view it is it gives you context. That's exactly what it gives you, right? Like when I use Stancia Masquerade as an example, I bet you a lot of our listeners had this experience. You got done with your pre-release and your buddy comes up and she's like, oh my God, Stancia Masquerade, best card ever, right? Won me like 3 games. This card's just completely busted. I'm never going to not play it. And it's like, okay, let me think about it and then I'll get back to you. And you put it in the Quadrant Theory. You come up with the solutions that I said where it's like, where it's good and where it's bad. Then you say, hey, can I see your deck? And she's like, sure. And it's all, 4 1s and, high, 5 2s and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, okay. So this card really performed well in this one environment, but that doesn't mean that it's universally good. It means that, I've now found its home basically. And the way that you got to that was by putting in Quadrant Theory and saying, this isn't adding up. That, I trust my friend's opinion, but this doesn't add up to be an A+ all-star that you put in every deck. And then you could probably tell your friend, hey, I get it that the card worked really well for you in this situation, but let's not get too hasty with saying how great it is. You shouldn't be first picking this card, right? You shouldn't be jamming it in every deck that can cast it. It's not on that level. It needs its support network. And I think that Quadrant Theory gives you that context. It lets you know, hey, there's something wrong here, or there's something off here. This shouldn't be that good. Why is it now? And then it lets you find out, where that card actually can be good.
All right, and moving on to the next, which we don't have, as far as I know, a word for, a fancy term for, but this is it's described literally as use all your mana. This is the heuristic.
This is sequencing, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
We'll get the brain trust on it. It'll be our next killer app.
You're the brain trust, right? Like,
so what this is saying is when you have 2 different plays, you play the one, and they're close. Play the one that uses the most mana. If it's turn 4, play a 4-drop instead of a 3-drop. And part of the reason is that way next turn you can play a 3-drop plus a 2-drop on turn 5. Where if you played the 3-drop, you can't play a 4-drop plus a 2-drop. So this is, I think, of all the ones, the one that leveled me up the most when I first learned it.
Absolutely, I had the exact same experience. This is my big. I learned it from you. Really? I honestly did. Yes, I told this story not on here. I've told it on other podcasts at the Community Cup.
Really?
I'm not kidding. I had. We're just going to aside here because you asked.
This is a great practical example.
Yeah. So this literally happened. So. We were playing at the Community Cup, you and I, and
you remember that.
And the situation is that you're allowed to help your teammates out. And then Luis, as the best player on our team, was bouncing around like a bumblebee from match to match, helping people out.
I loved it, by the way.
You were great. I mean, there was one point, and this is like an aside to an aside, where you were playing Elves combo. You were comboing off, and then you would walk away, help somebody win a match, come back, and just start comboing off. I'm just like, this guy is just absurd. Anyway, this was, I believe it was in limited, or some type of limited format, because it was I don't remember, something Mauler. It was 6 and a green, 1/1, and then you get 2 3/3 golems with it. And I had come to a situation that I had identified as a critical point in the game that I was playing. And I had the opportunity to play that, or to play something, that costs 5 mana or whatever. And I just said, hey, Luis, what would you do here? And I really just wanted to know, like, what your opinion would be on it. And you just, like, in a sentence or something, you were just like, you should play the 7-drop, like, if you have a chance to use up all that mana, you should use it. And then you can cast the other stuff in the next turns. And I was just like, Right. I should use up my mana. Like, because I have a 5, if I draw a 3-drop or a 2-drop, I can play it with it next turn. And it just clicked for me. It was like just one sentence. You didn't like sit down and like, have a long chat. Yeah, we didn't do a podcast, but it was like, it hit me in that exact moment. I was like, wow, like I should be prioritizing this. And it actually prompted me to start an experiment, a personal, like when I went to F&M and when I played on Magic Online, I said, all right, I'm going to try a kind of a weird experiment where I use up all of my mana whenever I can. Like, even if I don't care what the card is, like as far as, and I really mean this for creatures, by the way, not for removal, but
right. You're not like giant go through your creature on turn 1. I'm using
no, but it was like, I just said, I'm going to go to the extreme and just default to using up my mana to the most efficient way possible and not considering the strategic, like, well, this card's a little better here, and just see what happens. Because up until that point, I think I had just been like, I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest. And boom, I started winning more immediately. I started winning way more. And I was just like, this is a heuristic that I have now landed on. Now, I knew going into doing it to that extreme was not going to be correct, but I just wanted to see what it was like. Just if I just said, screw it, I'm just going to use up my, and it started with you telling me to play, what was that card? I don't even remember what it was called, but yeah, 6 and a green, 1/1 that makes 2/3/3 golem. So yeah, you did that, Luis. So right, well, thank you.
And as an aside to an aside to an aside, part of the reason this episode came into being is I was having a conversation with Emerson Sparts about all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned that when he first learned to play Magic, he played in a Grand Prix just a couple months afterwards. I think it was Nashville. And he didn't really know how to play Limited at all. Like, had barely learned how to play Magic, but he just played literally like as you described by heuristics. He's just like, use as much mana as I can every turn. Attack with everything when the combat looks like when I have a creature that's bigger than their creature.
Yeah.
And he said that he went 4-4 on day 1 and he barely knew what any of his cards did.
Bro, that's insane.
And he just decided to play straight up just using these rules. So
yeah, that's great.
If you haven't figured it out, this is a very powerful heuristic. It's saying that when you have multiple plays, lean, bias towards playing the one that uses the most mana, because over the course of the game, you'll spend way more mana that way. Again, because, when you play a 7-drop on 7 instead of a 5-drop, it means you can play a 5-drop plus a 3-drop on turn 8. And that you've saved tons of mana there. So where this goes wrong, well, it's often, actually. That's the funny thing, is that this is, I think, the most dangerous heuristic as well, because Magic has so much novel information and new situations where the most expensive play just might not be the right one.
Totally.
And so we can't give you a rule or a guideline that says to tell you when your 5-mana card is better than your 4-mana card is better than your 5-mana card, because there's just too many different cards and situations. What we can do is kind of give you a couple hints as to when this breaks down. One is to keep in mind this is a tiebreaker. This isn't a rule. This isn't always do this. If you have, to use just a more extreme example, a 4-mana 4/4 and a 5-mana 3/3. Often you should just play the 4-mana card, even though it's less mana efficient, because it's just much better on the board.
Right.
And the difference is if you have a 5-mana 4/4 and a 4-mana 4/4, by all means, play the 5-mana one. But when one's better than the other, remember, this isn't like you don't have to stick to this rule or stick to this heuristic as if it were a rule. The other is make sure you're actually saving mana by doing this. And using your example of the 7-drop, like, well, what if instead of a 7-drop, you had like a 5-drop and a 6-drop, no other cards in hand and 2 more lands in hand, or no other spells in hand and 2 more lands in hand? You're not really saving that much mana by playing the more expensive card, because your next turn, you're probably going to have a lot of mana anyway.
Right.
Like, you don't know what you're going to draw. That can always change it. But again, to take this to extremes, if you have 10 lands in play, it doesn't matter that much if you play, the 6-drop versus the 7-drop, because you'd have to draw an expensive card to make it matter.
Right. So, you probably only have one, 0 to 2 cards in your deck that actually change that.
Right.
But it's easy just to default back to, well, I should just spend the most, even though it's not as relevant there.
And so these are situations where the power of this heuristic is reduced. When you have tons of mana, then it doesn't hold true as much anymore. Yeah. When there's a clear power difference between the cards, you should not prioritize this rule that much.
Right.
Also, plan out your next couple turns. This, again, tiebreaker, this doesn't let you, like, if you know that if you want to spend 4 mana this turn, and you know that next turn you're actually probably priced into playing like a 3-mana removal spell, you're not saving that much by playing the 4-drop versus the 3-drop.
Right.
Because your next turn's locked into maybe a mana inefficient play or a specific play. So again, always check your work. But Also, if you haven't heard of this rule, this is a great rule. You should follow it.
It's an amazing. It was a life changer for me.
Heuristic, not rule.
Yeah,
the terms are complicated, but it was for me too. I mean, I don't remember quite as clearly the exact moment where I learned this.
Yeah, well, that's because you didn't have LSV teach you when you were on the Community Cup.
That's true, but it was many years ago, and I remember it blew my mind. It was like, wow, I feel so much like I feel like a more powerful mage now, and so try to default to the most mana efficient plays when it's close. Try to make sure it's actually close. Try to make sure that your next couple turns this takes your next couple turns into account. And the more mana you have, the less important this is.
Yep.
So,
good.
Here's another good one. Waiting until the last second to use your instance.
Yeah, especially with removal, this is one that comes up, I think, really early in a lot of Magic players' careers. After they get the rules down and start playing a little bit more regularly, you'll hear this, right? This is advice that is given to people at that level really frequently. I know it was for me, and I've heard other people say it continually throughout, since I've been playing Magic.
And the reason is people want to play their instance as an instant. They're an instant. Of course you'll do that. And we brought this up on the show before, but we were really delved deep into this here. And that is that the heuristic of waiting until the last second possible because it's an instant this is the one that's wrong more frequently than most. This is one that I don't know what the percentages are clearly, but I know that this is more of like, it's getting to the point where it's not even a useful heuristic to always assume you should wait to use your instance because there's so many reasons not to.
Yeah, that's true. It is starting to get to that point. It's almost become that you should just let newer players be aware that they have the ability to do that, but not urge them to do that as a default measure.
And some of the examples you put down for reasons why this isn't something you should lean on too heavily is that if your opponent has a creature that's too powerful that you'll just straight up lose to game turn, or you're going to kill it right away and you're in trouble if it stays around. Like if they've got a 5/5 and you're at 5, you should just kill it on your turn when they're tapped out. You're not getting extra value. They're not going to do anything. They don't need to. They're already winning the game with this creature. You're just giving them an opportunity to use their instance. The other is that your specific removal does not line up well with their defensive spells. The best example being they have a 3/3. They're tapped out. You decide to wait. Next turn they attack. You lightning bolt it. They giant growth it, and you take 6. you got actively punished for waiting there. Not only did you not kill their creature, you took an extra 3 damage. So when their defensive spells will punish you even more for waiting, that's another big deal. And then cards that grant protection like hexproof or indestructible. Those are going to be very hard for you to play around because they cut past almost every sort of instant speed removal. So you have a big advantage by playing your cards on your turn, especially if you then don't have the option to block their creature in combat. Like they give their creature indestructible, you can no longer block it if the trick didn't work.
Right. And then there's some big blowout potential there too.
For sure. So I actually think that the most important reason to mention not playing instance or not waiting as long as possible on instance is that I find this to be a particularly not useful heuristic. This is one that I think that you almost just have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And a couple episodes ago, we went pretty in-depth about that. So.
Yeah, and we don't talk about this isn't one that we like to perpetuate on the show. Not that I think it's like fundamentally wrong. It's just like you said, it breaks down in so many scenarios that it's not great. But this one does exist. I think that a lot of players that have started playing recently will be able to say, oh yeah, no, somebody told me that. And so I think it's worth addressing, though. I think it is also worth noting that this isn't one that, is a particularly LR specific thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next one I've got is don't be roddy. Don't be results oriented. So, which is to say, you shouldn't let the results of a decision dictate whether the decision was a good or a bad one.
Right.
When you take a line that gives you an 80% chance to win, and then you hit the 20%er and lose, it does not mean that was a bad line. In fact, it sounds like a very good one.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a heuristic?
No, it's really not. Like you're reading this, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but also like. This is more just like a concept, I think, just like a mentality rather than
it's a concept and it's really useful. You should just continue to use it.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention it.
Great point, Louise.
Look, I had the list of the killer apps and I saw don't be roddy, but it's actually just great. So continue to not be results oriented.
Fair.
All right, and then we've got a couple shorter ones here. One is almost a reverse heuristic. This is a combat shortcut that I've used a couple times before, well, many times, and that is when you've got a really complicated board. And this comes up the most often when you have the card Overrun, +3/+3, and trample to all your creatures. Mm-hmm. You can add up your total power, your opponent's total toughness, and that gives you a rough idea of whether the attack is profitable.
Okay.
Similarly, if you've got a complicated board, try to set up your opponent's best blocks, and if those are acceptable, you don't really need to go over all the rest of them. I mean, try to make sure that it's accurate, but you don't need to go all the way down the tree. Like, if they make worse blocks than that, great. And if those blocks are good enough, if the best blocks for them are ones you can live with, then you should probably attack.
Right, sure.
And the reason I say this isn't a heuristic, because this actually is the opposite. This is not a rule of thumb. You should mostly not be using this, but this is a way to turn complicated scenarios into somewhat less complicated ones by overgeneralizing. And this is one that, again, this isn't one that I'm saying you should, here's where it breaks down. This is more like, here's where you should use this. So this is just the other side of the coin, a more specific rule.
My heuristic for Overrun is cast it and attack with everything.
That's a good heuristic. Yeah. Most people do the same thing.
I've had a lot of success with that.
I've talked to people who their heuristic when the board gets too complicated is just to attack with everything and hope their opponent screws up.
Oh no, that's bad.
Yeah,
I don't like that at all.
Magic is a game that favors the defender. This is generally
in a big way. Yeah, that's a good way to make the board no longer stalled out, though.
Next one is don't get 2-for-1 / don't use removal on bad or free creatures. We're slaying some sacred cows here, but here is where is trying to remember that card advantage is in itself a heuristic. It's not that whoever is up the most card wins a game. We just use card advantage as a shorthand for a way to gain advantage in a game because in our experience, being up a bunch of cards is very conducive to winning the game. However, Magic is not a game where you literally win by getting more cards. You win by getting your opponent to 0 or no cards in the deck or whatever. So your shorthand, your heuristic might be don't get 2-for-1, don't get 3-for-1. Try to avoid those. Try to 2-for-1 your opponent. The fact of the matter is, some games you're going to have to 3-for-1 yourself. That's how you're going to win the game. You're going to block a 6/6 with a 3/3 and 2 2/2s, and it's a 7/7 with a 3/3 and 2 2/2s. You're trying to trade your 3 creatures for their 1 creature, and that's going to be the right play.
Yeah,
you just got 3-for-1. Trust me, I know it's painful, but don't let card advantage define your goals, even if it's a useful heuristic as to like how you should make your plays. You want to get card advantage, but that's not the ultimate goal. Similarly, using removal on like a bad or a free creature, it's like they've got a Thraben Inspector that got them a clue, or an Elvish Visionary that drew them a card, or a token, a spirit token they got kind of for free off a Dauntless Cathar. Yeah, it's painful to throttle one of those cards, but the card's value in play is the card's value. It doesn't matter where it came from or the fact that it drew a card.
Or if it's a rare.
Right. That's not relevant. Like, it's, again, all those things that I'm describing are ways we use to evaluate the value of cards when you're not looking at a particular situation. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's true. If you go around spending 5 mana to kill a 1/1 flying token that they got at no cost of a card, that's probably not a good sign. But
that doesn't make it incorrect, though.
That's the general guideline. The actual in-game decision is, this is a 1/1. What value does that have? Does it have high enough value? It's going to take me from 3 to 2, and they have a 2/2 unblockable in play. I should kill it. And I couldn't kill the other creature for whatever reason.
Sure.
And I think that people often get caught up on, Thraben Inspector was a cantrip. It drew them a card. I shouldn't use a removal spell on it. I'm going to get 2-for-1. That's where these all like overlap. And I'm just here to tell you that might be a useful way to think about Magic. It overall is. But when in play, you should treat cards as they are, not as what their implied values are.
Right.
Last one has to do with blocking and passing priority. And this is the best example of this is you attack with Cold Wolf, 2/2 that you can pay 6 mana to give it +4/+4. And they block with a 3/2. You have 6 mana. Your natural instinct is to use the ability of your card and make your card a 6/6. But there's a couple reasons why you don't. First of all, in this particular case, it's on the board. So if your opponent blocked there, they probably have something or are aware this is going to happen. The second is that if you just pass there, and your opponent passes, you make a trade. You traded a 2/2 for a 3/2, which is okay. I mean, obviously your 2/2 had other value, but you do at least get a 1-for-1 trade. It's safe. And it forces them to use a trick if they want to use a trick first. Yep. Because if you pump your wolf there and then they kill it in response, that's pretty bad for you.
It's like your whole turn's gone.
Yeah, your whole turn's gone, and
still lost your wolf. They kept their creature,
and they killed your wolf. They kept their creature. So I think. Oh, and similarly with combat tricks, you attack a 3/3 and they're 3/3. You have a +2/+2 trick in your hand. Your instinct is going to be to play that card because a good rule of thumb is use your combat tricks to win combats. But when your opponent has mana untapped, a lot of the time it's just ultimately in the long game, in the long run, it's going to be much safer. You're going to be up many more cards if you just wait there. If they play a trick, sure, play your trick. If that solves the problem, that's great. You often end up significantly ahead there. Whereas if you just pass and trade, you mitigate the blowout potential. So the heuristic of use your combat tricks or use your combat abilities is one that breaks down the most when you're offering a decent trade for yourself and your opponent has mana up. That's the time when I think that you should actually go against it and not use those tricks.
Yep, and that comes up pretty often.
Yeah. Do you want to close us out here?
Yeah. So let's talk about the big takeaways here, right? Because, we've broken down a bunch of these heuristics and, you may be thinking to yourself, well, so what? I shouldn't use these or, how do I know? And I think that gets us to sort of the core of the discussion here, right? On this show, on LR, our goal is to help you improve at Magic. And, a lot of our listener base starts off without having any of these heuristics at all. Like they just don't have an idea for what a default play looks like, what the baseline play is. And it's easy to forget the time, when we were all learning the game and we didn't have that context, and the tools and concepts, the heuristics that we use and teach on the show are meant to get you from that 0% to the 80%. If you just follow these, you're so much better off than if you just randomly or have no idea what's going on. It's a huge gap. I mean, you're filling up, a lot of percentage points there from going from being, a player who's not really competent to one who is. And that has a lot. But you know what? That last 20% is really, really important. We spent a lot of time on the podcast talking about that last 20%. This is where the excellent players are separated from the merely good players. This, speaks to the idea in my mind of applying concepts and how that in itself is a skill. And I know that's a weird thing to think of. You think that the concept itself is the skill and you just have to apply it. But I actually think that a great gamer, a person who's really good at getting games as complex as Magic is really good at understanding how the concept works and then has a lot of discretion when it comes to actually applying it. It's so easy to fall into a rhythm of just applying broad heuristics over and over again and ultimately limit your own potential because you're making what is probably the correct play most of the time, but the time when it's not correct is really going to hold you back. And if you're not actively thinking about that, you are just going to stay still. I mean, how many people, that listen to this show know a player from their local shop or a friend of theirs who is pretty good at Magic, but never gets better? They've been that same player for the last 7, 8, 9 years. They were the player in the shop that was there when you first started playing and they're still there. And maybe you've gotten better than them and you wonder to yourself, well, what are they doing? Like, were they thinking about things or are they trying to improve? Are they just happy to be where they're at? Maybe that's the case too. I think a lot of those players who, you used to think of as the good player in your shop and now you're starting to outplay are people who fall into this trap of not understanding how to apply these things. The key here, and the thing that I want the listeners to take away from this episode is that you have to understand the underlying reasons for these fundamental ideas if you're going to apply them correctly. You have to know the ins and outs of what these tools are for, what their limitations are, and why they exist, which is part of the reason why we went over a bunch of them in depth from this particular lens here, right? If I just came up to you and I said Cab's theory, and you're like, oh, I know what that is. That's where you draft a deck that has a lot of creatures, combat tricks, and removal spells, and not a lot of stuff that doesn't affect the board. And you think to yourself, okay, well, Cab's theory is the way to go, and that's how I'm going to draft. And you go in and you just draft it. And you just say, I understood what those guys meant by Cab's theory, and now I'm going to go apply it. You're doing yourself a huge disservice. Because understanding what we really were trying to get through with Cab's theory is to understand what a fundamental limited deck looks like, and then you have to build out from there, right? And I think a lot of our listener base didn't understand what a fundamental bare bones limited deck was really all about. And in my mind, it is about what a Cab's deck looks like. But my God, try playing that in Shadows over Innistrad. Yeah, there's a couple of color pairs that'll let you attack and stuff. But even then, you've got madness. You've got these weird, tricky things. You've got these randomly powerful enchantments that you have to play that don't necessarily affect the board directly. And you're missing out if you leave those alone. You know, and this is a classic example of how somebody could think that they understood a concept, go to apply it and be applying it wrong because they didn't fundamentally understand what that concept was all about, what that heuristic was helping to show you or teach you. Same thing with the vanilla test that we mentioned, right? You look in and you're like, well, this card doesn't pass the vanilla test, so I'm out. That's not how that works. The vanilla test is just to get you a baseline until you can put the cards into context. Then you can start turning the knobs on them to find out what's good and what's bad. If all you did was think that you understood what the vanilla test was for and start putting big red X's on cards that don't pass it, you are missing out on a lot and you're not going to develop with the set as everybody else does. These are incredibly important skill is to be able to apply these things. And that means you have to get into the nitty gritty and actually understand what it's all about there. So, you know, once you feel like you've really absorbed one of these concepts, this is where things get interesting because this is the time to go through and question it. And I know that sounds weird, but once you really understand how to apply it and what's going on with it, you have to now ask yourself, when wouldn't this apply? How will I spot the scenarios where this does not apply? Right? It's very weird to immediately flip it and say, well, when does this not work after you spend a bunch of time figuring out when it does? But I do think it's correct because understanding when it's correct to do the air quotes wrong thing in that 10% of the time is a massive opportunity for a level up. And I go back and I'll say it again, is that that's what separates the really excellent players from just the good players.
Exactly. This is knowing when to knowing the rules, but also knowing, or the heuristics rather, but knowing when to break them. And that is mastery.
That is it.
And again, we use these tools. We're going to continue to use these tools. We're not saying you level past the tools. We're just saying you need to level past if you're interested in reaching your full potential, which, you know, whatever level of Magic playing you want to do is great. I think Magic's an awesome game and you can play it for fun with however or much or little time you want to spend on it. And if you want to save time, using heuristics all the way through, I think will get you a lot of the way there.
Yeah, for sure.
If you want to be the best you possibly can, you have to learn these and then also know when they don't apply or when to adjust them or when to ignore them completely. And, you know, that's what everyone does. So this is an interesting topic.
I love this one, by the way.
This is one of the ones that's also broadly applicable outside of Magic.
Totally.
We didn't break down those examples of
which lane to drive in traffic or whatever.
Right. The heuristic of when you're supposed to ask for a raise at work or how you're supposed to do like how you're supposed to deal with someone you're having a problem with or whatever. But bear in mind, there's heuristics for a lot of different things, and look for I think it's really useful to look for the ones in your daily life, even outside of Magic, and then decide and then try to figure out when they don't apply, because that's where the true value is.
That's the meat of it. All right, great stuff, Luis. I had a really good time making that episode. Hopefully, the listeners like it too.
A lot of fun.
That will do it for limited resources this week. I want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. You can go there to find awesome free content, as well as a full selection of singles, including Mall Splicer, which is the card that I was talking about at the Community Cup, but I couldn't remember the name. Mall Splicer, 7 mana, 6 and of green. So, yeah, you can go find Mall Splicers at channelfireball.com. Anyway, that will do it for the show. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. If you want to find more things related to the show, like links to the Patreon that I talked about, the YouTube channel that we talked about, our streams, any of that stuff, it's all at lrcast.com right on the front page. And you can find links to everything that we have related to the show. Thanks so much for hanging out, Luis, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your week to hang with us, and we'll see you next time.
So this is this is going to be slightly off the beaten path today, but it actually feels right to pair with this particular episode.
All right, what do you got?
So I actually have the closest thing that I have to a religious belief is what I want to explain here.
Oh wow!
And I don't want to compare the two exactly. For those who don't know, probably because I don't really talk about it much. I'm not a particular religious person myself, but this is a belief that I feel explains some of the world at large, and it actually involves the Matrix. So,
the movie?
It does.
Oh wow! Okay.
Okay. So here is a thing that I think is reasonably likely to be true. I think it's reasonably likely that the world we live in is a simulation, and
okay.
I think a reason to believe that is that if we could make a simulation that had as a high fidelity as our world has, we certainly would. It would be a game we could play. We already make The Sims, right? And if we could make a more detailed, more complicated one, we just would. And we're getting better and better at doing that. Second Life and all these other games. So is it I don't find it unrealistic to think that the world we live in could be that to a more advanced society, a more advanced humans, whatever.
Whoa,
that make a simulation. Cool. And it might sound insane to you that I just said these things, but here's the really important part that I think keeps it from not being insane. You cannot let it change your behavior at all. Like, whether this is true or not, I don't make any different actions, because that I think would be insane. I think me making different actions in my life because I think this could be could be true, could be a possibility. I think that would have a hugely negative effect on my life. I'm not jumping off cliffs because I think I'll get a respawn. I'm not committing crimes because I think I can just restart from my last save point. I'm not insane. What I am saying though is, based on what I understand about humans and based on what I understand about what we would do with that technology, and based on the fact that if simulations could be created, there'd be so many possible different worlds that it makes sense that, like, if millions of simulated worlds exist and one real one exists, what are the odds that we're in the real one?
No, yeah, so, not very high.
Yeah, a lot of smart people I know have similar beliefs. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations over the years about it. Again, this isn't something that like guides me in any way. It's just something that I think is just reasonably likely to be true. It just makes sense to me. So I think it's just a kind of interesting way of looking at the world. I can actually link you to some articles we'll put in the show notes here. Because I've just done a bunch of reading about it too. And dovetailing with it is the belief that potentially free will does not exist either. But again, it can't change your behavior. Like, whether or not you actually are making the behavior or making the choices you think you're making doesn't really matter. You think you're making them, so you should just make them. But, look at the actions of any given person takes. Sometimes you react very differently to the same stimulus. Why do you do that? And you can't really explain it. It's just the chemicals in your brain are just decided, hey, today you're going to react this way. Mm-hmm. And that makes me think that a lot of life is much more random than people think it is. But, you just got to try to live your life, do the best, make the best decisions you can, use the heuristics available and all that. I just think it's funny that I think we have a lot less control over our lives than we might think we have, just because of how many decisions, when you have these decision points, it's not always clear why you make a certain decision over a different decision. But
let's just hope the shuffler's not broken.
Yeah. Well, when we were discussing this on Twitter the other day, I did say that part of the reason this philosophy appeals to me is that it's very clear that someone went into the program and set my luck variable all the way down to 0. So
you're on the white list.
No, I'm on the black list. My luck variable is all the way down.
Oh, please. That's so untrue.
It's at 0, but
that is absurd. I thought you said,
Marshall, I can't let that change my behavior. I have to make the best decisions I can, despite knowing that I'm playing on a much harder difficulty than someone like you.
The hero we deserve.